Hi, everybody. Welcome to tonight's Film Studies Online discussion of Stella Dallas from 1937. As most of you know, I'm Andrew Douglas, Senior Director of Education and Administration at Bryn Mawr Film Institute, and I'm really glad to have you all here to discuss this movie, which is a prime example of a Hollywood cycle from the 20s, well into the 50s, known as the woman's film. It's also the film responsible for the first Best Actress Oscar nomination that Barbara Stanwyck received, and she considered it her best work of her career and one of her all-time favorite roles. So I look forward to hearing your thoughts on the film. But before we get to those, just a little reminder about how things work here. Please keep yourselves on mute unless you're asking a question. I will call on you to ask your question or make your comment, and you can let us know you want to participate by using the raise hand function within Zoom, and I'll call on folks in the order in which I see their hands raised, so to speak. And feel free to get back in line if you have subsequent thoughts to make. In addition, we have the chat going if you want to make a comment in there, or let us know where you're from if you're joining us for the first time or you're from somewhere far away. And talk amongst yourselves, as they used to say. So with that, we can get started. And with all apologies to the Glussmans, it looks like Jean just edged you out. So Jean, welcome. Your thoughts on Stella Dallas?
Hey, everybody. I have to say, as much as I loved having the weekly movie nights that we used to have, these once a month have their benefits. I've watched the film now 3 times, including today, because
Wow.
because I wanted to keep reminding myself of the film because I'd never seen it before. So it has that benefit. And I wanted to mention real quick 2 King Vidor items that I think everybody might be interested in, or most of you will. I write and illustrate children's books, and I'm currently doing one on the childhood of Andrew Wyeth. And Andrew Wyeth's favorite film was The Big Parade, which he saw hundreds of times, even at a projector in his studio where he could screen his own 16 millimeter version. And there's a half an hour film on YouTube, and I'll put the link in the chat, where King Vidor visits Andrew and Betsy Wyeth here in Chadds Ford. And so I think you might like to see that. It's pretty cool. It's got French subtitles for some reason, but they talk about their work together. And also, there's a great book that you may know already, Andrew, called A Cast of Killers, which is written by Sidney Kirkpatrick, and it's the true story of how there was a murder of this old director, William Desmond Taylor, and King Vidor took it upon himself to try to solve the mystery of who killed him, and the book is all about that. So I'll put those 2 links in the chat for you. So the one quick observation that I thought was pretty cool, that King Vidor decided to leave in the film. There's a scene where she's making the dress for her daughter, and wait, where's my note? I lost my note.
Are you going to talk about Barbara Stanwyck's little stumble?
Yeah, she's talking about putting the dress on the dummy, and when she's taking it out of the closet, she's taking it out of the closet, and she says, "Put it on. Let me fit you instead of on this dummy." You could tell she covered herself, but he's decided to leave it in, which I thought was such a nice little touch, because even for melodrama, her performance was fairly naturalistic, if that's the term for it. Which brings me to my bigger thought, which was going into this knowing from your introduction that it's a melodrama. I was thinking the whole time, because I was very moved emotionally, but I was also thinking what is it about us as the viewers today, knowing, instinctively that performances in films like this aren't, there's something unnatural about them, but yet there's something about us that wants to connect with the over the top melodrama. So I just kept wondering, what do we bring to the film that's, that wasn't part of what the cast and crew did? Do you have any thought? I hope that makes sense. But do you have any thoughts on that? What percentage of this experience is just the human instinct to connect with it and bring ourselves to it?
Well, yeah, there's that old adage. I think it's, what is it? If a tree falls in the woods and nobody's there to hear it, did it make a sound? And movies don't exist really until there's a person watching them. And what I mean by that is there's a bunch of stuff being put up on the screen, and there's a bunch of sounds being made, and you are not seeing everything that occurs. We are constantly, when we watch a movie, we're constantly filling in gaps. We are constantly putting things together. We are constantly making associations that the filmmakers, in most cases, hope will make and are trying to give us the materials to make. But there's no guarantee that we will make. And not everybody does. It's really interesting if you've ever watched a movie with a friend, or there's a movie really well, and something happens in the movie and your friend is thoroughly confused, and you don't understand how they could be confused, how they couldn't understand that shot A plus shot B equals what you are supposed to assume happened in moment C before you get to shot D. And to them, it's magic and a mystery, and to you, all the logical necessary pieces of information were presented. So we're always bringing everything to these movies, and it is, in a sense, the filmmakers are trying to give you just enough so you will put the plot together and feel the thing you're supposed to feel, or laugh the thing you're supposed to laugh at. But in general, and this is where that melodrama thing comes in, they don't want to give you too much. But we nowadays, for the last several decades, have really, as a movie-going public, as a species, it would seem, that watches film and television, whatever else you call that stuff, we are less tolerant of things that are plainly mediated, that are plainly being created and presented and are not thought really to have any link to the real world, things that are representational instead of presentational.
Right.
And so even the melodramas, I think a movie that clearly qualifies as a melodrama is that movie from probably 10 or 12 years ago now, The Blind Side, about the family in the South and the young man who becomes a football player. And but if you look at that movie compared to a similar type of story being told in the 50s, the level of excess, it pales in comparison. And so one of the interesting things that melodramas and women's films did is they were aware of their presentational mode. To be fair, verisimilitude in Hollywood movies was never a huge concern, really, until the 60s or 70s. So, we watch movies, and there's all sorts of things that we don't consider acceptable in movies from the 30s and 40s and 50s, things that wouldn't fly today, whether it's special effects, whether it's performance style, whether it's the social mores. And I think this movie, and one of the reasons I think this is such a good movie, is that it is, you know, gosh, oh my gosh, is it 85 years later? Holy cow, 85 years later, it is still able to affect us and, evoke an emotional, in some cases, very emotional response from us. And that is because the people making the film, were confident in the story they were telling, in the moments they were creating, and in how much they gave us, enough so we would feel, but not so much that we would feel condescended to or something else.
I agree that people are going to either accept it or reject it from the start. And I remember even something like Bonnie and Clyde. I a few years ago, when I took an old girlfriend to your theater to see Bonnie and Clyde, it took her a little while to. She loved it by the end, but it took her a little while to accept it, only because even those performances felt a little less natural to her than what she's used to. So I guess it's where you are going into it that's going to make a difference sometimes too.
It is, and I think that people. I remember I saw Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon when I was in grad school at a theater, and I wasn't particularly knowledgeable about the sort of storytelling tradition that movie comes from, but I understood when I was watching it that it was a myth or a fairy tale or something like that. And I remember the people behind me, who I wasn't there with, people behind me said, what is that? That branch would snap if that guy climbed up there. What is this jumping from tree to tree? And I was, I just thought to myself, like, I sort of felt bad for that person, because they weren't willing. They paid the money, they took the time, and they weren't willing to go on the trip. And sometimes we can't. Sometimes we can't go on the trip. Sometimes there's something in it that pushes us away so far we're not willing to overcome it.
How can a cowardly lion talk?
Right. Yeah. Right. If we're gonna, we could, and when I teach classes at the Institute, I'll very often I have, I get some version of that question, and you could say that about almost any work of fiction, and the question is, are we going to try to engage with it or not? And sometimes we find barriers as individuals. We find barriers, whether they're political or cultural or just some matter of taste we can't get past. I know so many people I went to graduate school with who could watch the most abstract video art or the most philosophical, slow Eastern European film, but ask them to watch a musical and they'll walk out of the room.
Right.
And, that's, to me, that's their loss, but we all have those things.
Yeah. Thanks.
Glusmans, you're next.
Okay, so coming
Andrew.
in second in the Kentucky Derby, I guess.
Boy, Janice, looks like you're having fun.
I try.
We try to enjoy, and we're going to try to find something to do for the next month or two until we resume. Thanks for the advance warning.
Sure thing.
So Stella Dallas, there's 4 or 5 points that I've got here to throw in, and you can decide which you want to take and sink your teeth in or not. One is reminding ourselves the audience is in 1937. And as you said, we're 85 years later, and we have to sort of think about this today and 85 years ago. I don't know whether you did it on purpose, but I took your Mother's Day weekend choice into account as I watched, enjoyed, and tried to cogitate on the movie. Because in some respects, it made us uncomfortable. It also had some of the underlying sexism themes that we seem to hope and think that in 2022 we're making some progress about. I took Stella's view of life and sort of thought about when Stephen comes and tells her that he wants to go to New York, the sideshow, if you will, of the male-female relationship of 1937 and 57 and 77, and to some extent, certainly still today, of the woman's role in wifehood and motherhood. And it took me to or at least one of my additional thoughts of whether today, as we're looking at the Roe v. Wade and the potential for the Supreme Court, and the idea here that to some extent, she's in a position of not having a choice herself. The woman of 1937 was expected to be a mother, whether she was really cut out for it or not, whether she thought she was cut out for it or not. And at least some might say, and I found a little bit of this in doing a little bit of research, some might say, is this a woman who really wouldn't have wanted in a perfect world for her, would not have wanted to be a mother? I don't know the answer. I don't know that the director and the writer give us the answer, but it certainly is a question. And our noses are pointed so clearly at the fact that for a man who's married to be having an affair is, I don't know about expected, but it certainly is okay. And yet, even the hint that she might be having an extramarital affair, which, at least as far as I could tell, she wasn't really, is like the Scarlet Letter. And I'm going back to the books from reading when I'm in I guess middle school or high school, and that horrible double standard that she has to put up with. Women today are potentially continuing to be forced to be mothers. There's no question for fatherhood, and Stephen comes and goes as the father as he chooses, and the movie doesn't make him the villain for that. So there's a lot there. I think that it's a disturbing movie in some respects. It's a study of a woman's thought process and decision to make major sacrifices on behalf of her child, her daughter, along with the other things that you threw in your introduction. So a very interesting movie, 85 years later, and you can look at it across those 8.5 decades. And you can think about any of those or none of those. But thank you for challenging us again.
Well, thank you for those comments. I have to say I have a little bit of a different take on the movie, and I think I have a different take on the movie for two on the relationship between Stella and Stephen, and I think I have a bit of a different take for two reasons. One is the period, not that the mores of what was the man's decision, what was the woman, what was the woman's decision. Not that those things were right, but I mean, this was made in Hollywood of 1937, and so I don't let myself get troubled by that. I factor that in to my understanding of the film, and I try to see, because that is such a given and such an institutional and cultural burden in a way for the movie to deal with. I look for the places where it might challenge that, because the fact that the movie reflects the pretty sexist culture of the times, I don't find surprising, and I think I'd rather not. I think you can find a problem like that for anything, particularly anything older, and I think there's other things of value in these things besides, in addition to recognizing that, and hopefully how much things have changed. But I I think that there's a case to be made, and I think it's very interesting. I think a lot of people who see this movie don't sort of think of Stephen as being quite as much of a bad guy as you think. He wanted her to come with him. And now you may say, well, she should have a say, but I mean, I think in couples, I think a lot of couples, particularly in the 1930s, if the woman wasn't employed, because that was often how it was, they went where the man's career took them. And he wanted her to go with him to New York, and he wanted the whole family to go with him to New York. And so I think that once she decides she'd rather stay back, presumably because she likes her life there, or thinks she'll like her life there better. I don't know that that's, that to me, that changes the dynamic a bit. I also think that, there's an extent to which she went after certain things. Now, did she go after certain things because where she was coming from was a bad situation? That's probably part of it. But there's certain things that she sought out. And I think you're right that initially she didn't seem to want to be a mother, but to me, very quickly that changes. And she decides that she's going to, commit herself to her daughter. I think that the more complicated and perhaps more relevant for today's world questions are, where do her obligations to herself start and her obligations to her daughter end? And where does her right to demand, sort of respect from the larger world, and her willingness to forego that so her daughter can have a certain kind of life. Where's that line? I think that's more of a challenge or more of a question that still speaks with us today, or speaks to us today, excuse me. But I found your take on this very interesting, because I've taught this in courses before, and I watched this obviously and discussed it in a number of settings, and typically people aren't as hard on Stephen Dallas as you were, but it's interesting that that may say something about those past eras when I had previously watched this, because I haven't seen this movie in at least 6 or 7 years before to this weekend, and it may say something about the people as well. So it's a lot to think about. Stephen,
the challenge, as I said, that you gave us over the last couple of years, is you try to watch it in its time, and I guess because we're in today and these other issues are there, I either brought today into it, or I felt I should bring today into it. I'm not sure. I certainly agree that this was, very typical of the time in 1937 in many regards. One of the other viewers mentioned, she comes home from the hospital looking like she's never had a baby. She also makes a comment, it sounded like she'd been in the hospital for almost 2 weeks, which of course today is absurd. We had a granddaughter this weekend, and the baby was born at 12:30 on Saturday morning, and Sunday they were home.
Wow.
And that was a long delay. But all of these things we look at in two views, and you're right. Some of my observations are 2022 observations of a 1937 film. But of course, each of us, the viewer is the one who makes the film, and as films last, the view on the film is always changing.
No, you're right. And a lot of, and you and I mean, there's an extent to which everybody who watches this movie in, 85 years later deserves some amount of credit, because it's very easy. And I have encountered plenty of people who will write something off, and now they won't write it off because it's of a certain age or it's black and white or whatever, but they'll write it off because it might contain it might depict a culture that they don't approve of, or it might depict values that they don't subscribe to. And, that's, that's a lot of things that we all encounter in the world. And the question is, particularly when the thing's 85 years old, is there anything to be learned from that? I think there obviously are things that, everyone's well within their rights if they started watching this and they found, the gender dynamic, for example, too much to get over, then they would stop watching, and they're probably not here in the discussion. But the fact that you stuck with it, and that most of the folks here, who I would imagine a number of them probably had some similar thoughts to yours, stuck with it, is, it says something about your commitment to engaging with things like this, and that's good, because we miss out on a lot if we won't do that. Stephen, you have a question or comment?
Yes, I'm appreciating all these comments that we're getting right now, but I want to point out a couple of things. One was the depiction of her family that she grew up in. The mother, she just looks haggard and tired and not even paying any time to pay attention. Conversation goes on and she's working in the background, lifting the pots and, just barely, interacting. So, and then her Stella looking to escape from that is very believable and motivated that way. My observation, I guess, is it seems like she did not protect that escape by behaving. You would think that someone who escaped from that poverty into a situation that Stephen was able to provide her would have been very protective of that, but she kept acting in a way that, to be perfectly honest, the first third I fell into that. This is so annoying and unbelievable. I don't know if I can watch the rest of the movie. Once she has the daughter, and all of a sudden it just clicked, and I really enjoyed the movie. It's more sympathetic, her self-sacrifice or whatever for her daughter. Not more believable, but it just clicked with me somehow. I don't know if there's a question or observation in there, but I just rambled on.
No. So here's the thing, right? Because you raise a question or you raise an element of the film that could be seen as an inconsistency or logical flaw, which is when she's on the date with him, the date that presumably ends with them being married, or when she goes to bring her brother his lunch at the factory, she is trying very, very hard to act in a way that she thinks Stephen Dallas will approve of. And your point, I think, is why does she then, not too long after that, start to act in a way that he clearly does not approve of? If she went to those lengths to change her her socioeconomic situation, and if we assume that that's why, or deduce that's why she focused on him rather than somebody else, which I think the movie suggests, then why did she not continue that transformation, that charade, whatever you want to call it, depending how cynical we are, as the time went on? And I think that there are two possible answers that don't include she just got tired of it, or she thought she didn't have to anymore because they were married and that was that, or whatever. And those two answers are that the movie is Now, keep in mind, this movie comes out in 1937. This is the middle of the Great Depression. This movie is making some kind of comment about class and culture and the extent to which it is or isn't ingrained. And so there's that possibility. And I guess it's worth noting that it's based on a novel from the 20s, but the movie is the movie. We have to take the movie on its own terms, and so it's 1937. I think the other more likely reason she acts that way and continues to act that way, and even after she hears what her daughter's friends say about her, she continues to act that way, is that her dress and her speech and her bangles and her baubles and her 10 bracelets on an arm and all that stuff isn't really the point. And it isn't really why people mock her, or why she doesn't understand what Laurel needs as she gets older, or she thinks she doesn't understand, or whatever. What it is that's that excess that we associate with melodramas. That is the visualization, that is the representation of whatever class and culture and taste, realm that Stella Dallas comes from. That is how that gets represented in the movie, and how it is made visible and observable and recognizable to others in the film. But we are not meant to think that even after hearing what those rich teenagers said about her, that she didn't understand, that she was just still not refused it. She was still unwilling to take off some of the bracelets. It's not that literal. And so you see this in this genre. It's a device, and I'll grant you it's easier to recognize it as a device when the movie's in Technicolor and or the character is Joan Crawford, or that, Joan Crawford in her Mildred Pierce sort of severe shoulder pads, or it's Douglas Sirk with all of his music and color and accoutrement. But that's how I interpret it, that it's not, she doesn't, because otherwise it seems like she understands and then she doesn't understand. It's not that she stops understanding. It's that, as was just said, that can't be taken out of her. She doesn't particularly want to take it out of her, it seems, after a certain point. And she probably thinks she shouldn't have to take it out of her. And I think that's a valid point, a very valid point as well. But that's how I see those things. And then when she has that independent streak, that rebelliousness, that iconoclasm, I guess you could say, but that changes when she becomes a mother. Not immediately, but almost immediately. And then we're seeing a different side of her, and we're seeing a different focus to the story. And we're also seeing a relationship that is more important to her than all of that. It's the first thing. She knows she's not a dummy. She knows what she has to do, or what she would have to do to accomplish the things she wants to accomplish, but she's not willing to do them really until it comes to, Laurel sinking or swimming as a woman. Let's see. Dana, you have some thoughts.
I do, and they're kind of down the same rabbit hole, which, okay. All right, so I have a lot of trouble with these melodramas. I'm not a Douglas Sirk fan, so forth. So I have to be able to watch these movies and get something more out of them. I can't, an explanation that it's just that sort of excess won't work for me. But at the same time, this movie I found to be really upsetting and really troubling, not for the obvious reason, of course, at the end where, women are wringing their hands, and perhaps men too, because of her giving away her daughter, which was heartbreaking, totally heartbreaking. But because I just think poor Stella didn't really know what she wanted. And if we want to look at the ending, she gave away the one thing she did have, the one thing that she did love, and determined if there was anything that she achieved, it was a wonderful relationship with a daughter that she may not even have deserved, but she had that, and she threw that away. And that's really heartbreaking. I'm not sure in 1937 that's what the movie was trying to say, but that's what it said to me. Also, because of all of this, I had a problem because I was looking for some sort of character arc for Stella, and not only did I not see one, maybe I'm asking too much by looking for one, but I also saw regression. I thought she got less class, she became more classless as time went on. By the time she took her daughter to that country club setting, one would have thought she would have known a little bit more of how to comport herself. And she was so extreme in her dress, and so much so. And her daughter didn't see it either. And we're supposed to buy into the fact that this daughter, who epitomized class, I thought she didn't dress like her mother. She didn't talk like her mother. She wasn't raised to be anything like her mother. Didn't see it either. I guess that sort of feeds into the melodrama. But I wanted there to be some sort of a growth in Stella, something somewhere along the line. And I refuse to accept that she walked away happily from seeing her daughter get married is a sign of growth. And I'll say one more thing. I don't want to overdo here, but if love is the way, which is what we're left with, oh, my daughter found love. She's going to be happy. She's going to have what I didn't have, music and sunshine. What exactly was she looking for in the very beginning? What is it she wanted in a man? Was it the money? Was it security? It clearly wasn't love. So there are all sorts of things that Stella did not grow from, did not grow with. And I don't know, I find that really troubling and interesting too, that Barbara Stanwyck felt that this was a great performance, because I would think as an actor, you would sort of need something like that. So she obviously felt something. She could hold on to something. But anyway, so that was troubling to me. And there you go. That's it. So thanks. Great choice. Sure. I don't think I've ever seen this. Andrew, I don't know if we ever saw this together. I don't remember I don't remember seeing it. No. I don't know if we've ever studied it. So this was real new to me and was very interesting. Yeah.
I don't have a problem believing the daughter, because that the daughter wouldn't recognize her mother. We have people have kids, and when the kids are young, they think, I'll just use myself as an example. My son thinks I am the strongest person on the planet. And
true.
A day will come when he will realize that's not true. And a day will come when he will realize that there are things about me that not everybody likes. But he doesn't realize that now. And I hope he doesn't realize it for a long time. But I am what he knows as a dad, and Stella was what she knew as a mom. And Stella gave her what she needed, in the ways that a parent does. And so she had no reason she could think, you can think your parent is different. You can think anyone is different, but not have the same value judgment about that difference that other people have. And she never heard anyone before she met those society people say anything negative about her mother, including, I think, Stephen. And I think that's worth noting. He clearly disapproved of some of her choices, but I think given how a husband might have talked to his wife in 1937, he was pretty reserved about it. So that's what I'd say about the daughter. Regarding Stella, I think that Stella's arc is a change in the extent to the balance of her mental and emotional energy in terms of how much she cares about herself and how much she cares about other people. And over the course of the film, her caring for herself starts out very, very high. I mean, at the beginning, she basically is sort of, kind of brushes off her dad and her brother because she's got her eye on Stephen Dallas, and she doesn't care that in a small town, in a mill town where all the families know each other, we can say that her father shouldn't have wanted to disown her because she stayed out all night. But I have to believe that would have been the general reaction in most such situations in that town at that moment. And she didn't care about that too much. So she cares about herself, and she doesn't care, she wants to go out dancing when she comes back from the hospital. She doesn't initially care about, resting or being there for the baby or whatever. So, Stella cares about herself far more than she cares about other people. And over the course of the movie, that shifts to the point where some of us may say she cared too little about herself by the end. But I think that's a very significant arc. And I think that you see, while her clothing doesn't change, and I agree it gets more gaudy, but she is not living the life she thought she was going to be living. And she is trying to find her enjoyment where she can. And I mean, do any of us think she was really sick when they were at that resort? Or she wanted to stay in the room. She liked the room, and she wanted to have the candy and read her movie star magazines and all that. And so she was taking care of herself in the way she dressed. She was expressing herself, and she didn't or wouldn't or couldn't learn the lesson that more is not always better when it comes to clothing and jewelry or whatever. But to her it was. And so that was how she treated herself or rewarded herself or gave herself something that she wasn't getting from not having her husband, and from her daughter being away from her more, and from not understanding even the things that it was that her daughter wanted to do or was participating in. So I saw an arc. I saw a sad logic, but a logic to how she changes in her appearance over the movie. And I think there are ways in which she doesn't change, or there are trajectories she doesn't follow, but I don't think that necessarily means that there are zero ways she changes. Before I get to Mike and Ed, Amy had a question or comment in the chat about the birthday party and how no one came. She says, I'm assuming the teacher told the other parents not to have their children attend, but was surprised by that. Yeah, I think the word spread, and it is sad, and it is shameful, and as a parent, I would hope that nobody would say to their kid, you can't play with the Douglas boy because his dad is an X, Y, or Z. Because I wouldn't say to my son, I don't want you to play with that kid because his dad is an X, Y, or Z. As long as, there wasn't things like physical safety or whatever. And so the idea that these people don't live their life, that Stella doesn't have her house or live her life the right way or what have you, the idea that's a reason for the daughter whose company they enjoyed greatly up until yesterday, that's one of the saddest moments in the movie. And imagine how Stella felt when that's really the first inkling she gets that she's going to be a burden to her daughter. I mean, that's a sad moment, but yeah, I think you're reading it right. That's what happened. That's my understanding of what happened. Mike, you have a question or comment?
Yeah, and thank you for choosing this. I'd never seen it. And I haven't seen your introduction, so maybe you address this there, and I apologize in advance if so. But I was really struck by that final scene where she's walking away after watching her daughter's wedding through that window. It reminded me that she and Stephen went to a movie, a silent movie, as their first date. And it was a scene of a man and woman kissing. And I think that's mirrored in the way she witnesses her own daughter's wedding outside that window, through that window. And I wondered if maybe people have commented on whether this film is trying, I mean, it's still a young medium at this point, I guess, but is this movie making a comment on movies? You mentioned that she was reading movie star magazines in the hotel, or the resort, which I'd forgotten about. But I wondered if there's any discussion about the fact that she ends up seeing the beginning of her daughter's marriage kind of as a silent movie, and maybe this goes to what you were saying earlier about caring for others versus herself. When she's at that movie with Stephen, I think it's clear she's naturally at that point projecting herself into that scene. But at the end, she's watching the wedding and thinking only about her daughter's hopefully her daughter's good life ahead of her. So I wondered if you had any thoughts or knew a conversation around whether this movie is in some way making a comment on the medium of film.
I think it's a really great point. I find myself thinking something similar every time I'm at the end of the movie. I mean, there's other ways that they could have had her sort of surreptitiously be able to observe her daughter's wedding. It didn't have to be, the curtains open and there's keep the curtains open for the show sort of thing. And the contrast between how dark it is outside and how bright it is inside. I mean, I think you're right. It's been a while since I've read sort of the academic scholarship on this film, but there was a time when I read a good bit of it. I don't remember that being referenced. And I do have to say that I don't think if King Vidor, the screenwriter, had that in mind, they would have kept it to themselves, because that sort of self-awareness within a Hollywood movie at that time, because that's a serious self-awareness. That's not sort of Buster Keaton walking out of the screen. That's a kind of a criticism of what Hollywood is presenting us. I think that that wouldn't have been discussed. I also think there's something that undermines that take, which is that anyone who would have thought to make that sort of meta criticism or to suggest that connection would also have to agree that people's lives don't end in happy endings nearly as often as they do in the movies. And so this movie is playing with this notion that Stella has learned her or places value on a certain idea of romance or of a relationship with a man or a wedding or what have you, based on what Hollywood tells her. And anyone who would sort of want to kind of critique that would also have to be aware that that happy ending is rarely, if ever, the whole story, let's say. And so, but then how do we square that with her walking away with complete satisfaction? Unless we're trying to say the movie thinks that her satisfaction will be hollow or short-lived, then I don't think the movie does tell us that, based on how her walk speeds up, her smile gets bigger, her head gets raised, and the music swells. That I think that's the heroine triumphant. And so I would be willing to bet that the kind of sort of irony of that, that connection wouldn't have been lost on the people making the film, but I'm not sure the intention was as much of a critique as we might think would be appropriate or called for. But it's a great point. I'm glad you mentioned it because I didn't mention it in my introduction, but I didn't want to mention it tonight, so I appreciate it. Ed, you have a question or comment?
Okay, yes, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. So when I was taking film classes at Syracuse, one of my instructors had a great comment. He said, make sure you see bad movies because you see where they make the mistakes. When you see a really good movie, there's hardly any mistakes in it. It just looks seamless. So he told us to all see Plan 9 from Outer Space, which was a great choice for a lot of reasons to see a bad movie. But I'm wondering what in this movie, where you saw maybe some mistakes or flaws or things that maybe in hindsight, and I'm not meaning hindsight in 2022, I'm meaning hindsight in like, maybe 1939, a couple of years after it was over, where maybe there were some things that may be considered mistakes and what you thought about that.
You mean sort of, you don't mean like technical shortcomings. You mean like where the story could have been told better or a missed opportunity in a story or character sense, that sort of thing?
Right. Well, sometimes it's a combination, like poor editing, makes some things seem out of context or something totally out of place because they cut the part and then they didn't go back and fix it with the script or reshoot a scene. So it could be a combination.
I guess what I would say is for me, and I don't really, you'll probably agree with this, part of the way you can assess just how bad a bad movie is how many of the mistakes do you notice while you're watching the movie, while you're in the thick of it.
Right.
Because if it's a really bad movie, you notice them as you're going through it. If it's an average to, sort of middling movie, you can identify them sort of after the fact the more you think about it. But in that moment, you were reasonably entertained or whatever.
Right.
And I would say that I didn't think about this much while I was watching it, but I do think about it every time afterwards, which is if over the course of the film, if what I said is remotely accurate, that there is an arc, there is a trajectory for Stella Dallas, and Stella Dallas's character arc is that she starts to change how much she starts to, moderate or modulate how much she cares about herself and allows herself to put some of that energy in getting what she wants into caring about others. If that's true, then how does she not, when she's traipsing around that resort at the end, how does she not like even have an inkling and not even see how different she appears, how different she is in the way she talks and the noise she makes from all those other people? And now I think that at other points in the movie, we hear her say, her when she's making that dress for her daughter, she said she wants to add something, and her daughter says, no, it looks fine the way it is. I mean, we hear her sort of her idea that more is better, and Steven says something to her. And so we sort of know that. But if she's gradually becoming more aware of what her daughter needs and less focused on what she wants, I would have thought, I think it might have helped a number of the, the criticisms of the character and of the film if there was some explanation or some moment where it dawned on her, or where we at least saw her think about it or something. To me, that really, because the other thing too is one of the challenges, one of the ways a lot of movies make mistakes is something isn't the case until it is. I mean, the way this movie, for example, and there's a host of reasons why they had to do this that weren't really there, wouldn't have been their first choice as storytellers probably, but the way they get married right away, on what doesn't seem like their first date, but seems like maybe their fourth or fifth date. Or a movie where the man and the woman seem to hate each other until the moment they don't, and we didn't see anything change, we don't think, but something changed. And so I feel like that, seeing that shift, seeing one more instance of her shift in caring about herself and that receding, and her caring about her daughter, or her commitment to giving her daughter what she needs in her mind. I think to me, that's the biggest the biggest missed opportunity.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Glussmans, did you have another comment?
Yeah, hi. So I had a comment about Stella's alliance with this Ed Munn character. I just found it confusing and disturbing in so many ways because, there was a point at which she said to Stephen, if you want me to change the way I speak or the way I act, I'll do it. And he said to her, no, I like you just the way you are. You don't have to change. In other words, you don't have to class yourself up. But then I think, he obviously changed his mind later when she had already taken upon herself to stay a little lower class. But her relationship with this Ed Munn just really got to me because in the beginning, when she met him at that dance after the baby was 3 weeks old or so, he was presumably society. And he certainly lost it through his drinking. And I felt like he pulled her down with him, that maybe part of her arc was because of him. And just as a little aside, the last name Munn, M-U-N-N, there's a person by that name who is a great-grandson of John Wanamaker from our department store in Philadelphia. And his name was Gurney Munn. My father was in the Army with him. And I was just wondering if there's other Munns out there that were part of society. And this particular Munn just kind of fell from the good graces of his high society people also.
I don't think he was ever part of society. I think he was at that event, and he had appropriate dress to be there. But he had done well at the races. He was a gambler. And I think that the people at the table where he was sitting sort of enjoyed having him around to the extent that they did. But I never got the sense that he was society. He was someone from Stella's walk of life who had earned enough money or obtained enough money to be able to, and had met certain people to be able to orbit, share their orbit some of the time, but not all of the time. And this is one of the interesting things about this movie, because it's about money, but it's not about money. It's about something else. And Ed, we see Ed sort of fall from his status, sort of decreases, gets less over the course of the film until he's sort of living in that flop house at the end. But I think I don't think he brings her down as much as we're meant to appreciate and respect Stella for not following his trajectory. She doesn't go on her daughter's trajectory, but she doesn't follow his trajectory. And a lot of times what these movies do, and I don't mean melodramas as much as I mean Depression era Hollywood movies, is they really don't want to say having money means you're good, or having money means you have these qualities, and not having money or coming from humble beginnings or whatever means you don't have these qualities. What they typically tend to do is they tend to have a good rich person and a bad rich person, or a nice rich person and a mean rich person, and a good, working class or poor person and a bad one. And so, Ed's the bad one, Stella's the good one for the working class. And Stella's husband's second family are the good, wealthy people, and those society people who make fun of Stella are the bad, wealthy people. And it's a bit, it's a bit formulaic, but the movie industry at this time, people go to the movies for escape at this time, and they, something that a lot of people, particularly younger people, have trouble understanding and appreciating nowadays. But there was a time in America when, if you were rich or well-to-do, that was an admirable trait. I mean, the bulk of people didn't resent you or have cynical views of you or think, how did you get it? They thought, wow, that's terrific and something to aspire to. And so, and Hollywood during the Great Depression, when it's being monitored by the Roosevelt administration, definitely doesn't want to do anything that will send mixed signals or cause greater strife or pull the classes of the country further apart, when other events were already doing that. So they're very for those two main reasons, they're very careful to not ever make all wealthy people bad and all poor people good, so to speak, in the movies. And so I think that Ed's seen as someone who doesn't get control of his his more destructive or more problematic impulses, and Stella is someone who does, and that's one of the lessons of the film. Gene.
Hi, real quick, you made me think of the train sequence with Ed and Stella,
Right.
when they're embarrassing themselves. Just a quick observation about her performance, which I'm assuming this was a set and they weren't shooting on live moving trains back then. And she does a great job when she's walking down the aisle of just being a little bit off kilter or off, a little unstable, to really make that convincing to me. I picked up on that, and I just wanted to mention it to see if anyone else had.
Yeah, it looks like Mike noticed and appreciated it as well in the chat. Yeah, I mean, Barbara Stanwyck is she's a thorough professional, and she had that reputation, and much sort of lower drama than we tend to think of movie stars, even of that era, being. And she was a hard worker, and it paid off here for her and for us, I think. That looks like there aren't any more questions or comments. So I thank everyone for joining me for this discussion of Stella Dallas. I'm glad a number of you found the film to be worthwhile, despite its problematic elements. As David alluded to earlier on, we are going to take the summer off from these film discussions, but we'll be back in the fall. So please, if you don't already get our education email, sign up for them, and you will learn certainly toward the end of the summer when we'll be back in the fall, but you'll also learn about these and many other great programs that we have on site at the Film Institute. We have a lot of opportunities to see and learn about some great films with some wonderful instructors. So I hope you'll consider coming down to the Institute and trying one of these seminars. They will be available virtually, but details on that will be coming out a little bit later. But we are open right now. We're showing Everything Everywhere All at Once and a handful of other really interesting movies. So come on down to the movies. It's fun, and we're there, and my colleagues and I will really be glad to see it. We appreciate it. So as I said, sign up for our emails, find out what we're doing. And if you like what we're doing, whether here or in our other education programs or in general, and you're not a member, think about becoming a member. And if you are a member, or maybe membership's not for you, consider making maybe a small show of support, because we will certainly appreciate it. And we want to continue to be able to bring you programming like this and programming like what we have at the theater. And we need your help to do it. And you all have been, so many of you have been such wonderful supporters over these last 2+ years. And I'm glad that there aren't as many people coming to the discussions as there had been in a way, as I said in my email, because it means folks are out doing other things, including coming to the movies. So hopefully I'll see some of you at the movies this summer. And if not, I'll see you back on screens this fall. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Andrew. Have a